John from Ripewave Audio, and for this video, we have a competition between the Marantz Cinema 30 and the Denon AVR-X6800H, both audio-video receivers new to their respective brands this year, and we're going to see which one sounds the best. And if you've been following the series, this would have been part 7 of the Denon and part 3 of the Marantz, but we thought let's do these together and do a head-to-head competition, but not just with these two products, but see how it compares against our Marantz Cinema 50, which is a couple grades below the Cinema 30, and our Emotiva RMC-1 AV processor. And I know a lot of you don't like me comparing processors with receivers, but we do it anyways. So of course we've had our series here with the unboxings of the Denon, of the Marantz, and we've done various configuration videos. On the Denon, we went a step further with all the calibration stuff what we did with Dirac and with Odyssey and Odyssey Mult-EQ-X. And these units are comparable when you talk about where they sit in the lineup for each of the respective brands, but the Marantz is $1,000 more. Now granted, we'll take a look at the Marantz and we can feel the quality in its remote and the finishes and the materials and how it's packaged, and certainly they put a little more care into the cosmetics and everything for the Marantz. Now some of you don't like the porthole design, but it still speaks to the quality of the materials that it's being used, where we can feel like this does seem like a more expensive unit than the Denon that has more of a traditional look. I mean, we could go back to the 80s and the way Denon has its look. Marantz does look a lot more modern, whether you like that porthole or not. You know, these units fit below their flagships in the respective brands, but above a couple of other models that are capable of doing very similar speaker counts, but these add 2 more channels over the Denon AVR-X4800 and the Marantz Cinema 40, so you can have those front wide speakers. There's a test that we're adding in addition to the sound comparison today, and that is the startup time. And we've added this chart that we've had running for the last few test cycles where we looked at Arcam, Emotiva, Monolith, and Sony, as well as Pioneer, Onkyo, and Integra, and of course the Denon and Marantz brands now fitting into this. Now the Denon and Marantz aren't the fastest to start up and not the slowest. What we did observe is whether you're doing a cold boot. Now cold boot, we unplug this from the wall, we put the power cord in, we hit the power button on the front, and how long it takes to start up versus just a standby mode where we hit the button on the remote, goes into standby, we hit it again, we turn it back on. We found those times almost equivalent. Cold boot in some cases was a second or two longer, but that could have been just error in the way we were doing. Essentially, these are the same. This is unlike some of the other processes that we looked at, particularly that Monoprice, which had a 12-second startup, which is the same as Denon Marantz from standby, but from cold boot, 90 seconds. And what I think the difference is, some of these products are more like a PC that's running in the background. Maybe they're running a derivative of a Linux operating system. I think that might be the case with Monoprice, and that's accounting for that long startup. Now, I think Emotiva as well, and again, long startup with a standby time around that 12-second mark, just a little bit short. I think Monoprice and Emotiva are based off this computer-like operating system. Arcam is somewhere in between at 36, 37 seconds, same as standby versus cold boot. I think the more that these units are using an embedded operating system versus a Linux type operating system, the less PC-like they are internally, the quicker they boot. Of course, nothing was as fast as the Pioneer, Onkyo, and Integra units, which are 2 to 3 seconds from standby and no more than 5 seconds from cold boot. So they are the winners on startup. If you want something that will quickly start up, then the Pioneer, Onkyo, and Integra brands are for you. But Denon Marantz, not too bad, not too far to wait for that 12 to 14 seconds. As far as our comparison on the sound, the way we decided to do this test is to simplify it. And to simplify it, it's a lot easier to compare a 2-channel sound or even 1-channel sound. And to do that with your front speakers and set them at full range. So we're not to use our subwoofers. We're going to keep this simple. We don't want the configuration. Did I set my crossovers right? Are they the same on all these units that are part of the test? And we got 4 units that we're testing. You take that all out of the equation and you just focus on those front speakers. And setting it to full range is the first step. The other thing that we wanted to make sure that we weren't also doing LFE plus main on those, where it was still sending information to the subwoofer. The subwoofer will only get LFE source signal, of course. If we set it to stereo, we're not going to be sending any LFE. So you should never hear the subwoofer with this configuration. And the other thing that we want to do is make sure that any of the room calibration correction software is not active with its filters. So Odyssey, Dirac Live, turned off. We had to make sure the same thing on our RMC-1. The configuration's a little different there, but we still set the speakers to large in that case. And we also make sure that our filters are not one of the 3 slots that Dirac will set for one of those speaker layouts. This is how we started the calibration. And of course, we have our setup where we take our Mac running the room equalization wizard for our measurements with a UMIC 1, plugged it in here using our Moto M4 for the DAC that we'll send the signal as an analog signal to each one of these to do our sweeps and then see how these record. Now, normally I'm taking measurements from the main listening position, but in this case, I decided to do it near field with just 1 speaker. So I set REW just for the left channel, put the microphone near field to my left-hand Polk tower, and did the measurements from there. There's several options for 2-channel mode with each of these receivers or processor. You have stereo mode, you have a direct mode, and you have a pure direct, or in the case of the RMC-1, it's a reference mode. And we looked at it for each of those cases. So this first graph that we're looking at here is the sweep for a stereo setting for the modes for each of these. And what we found is the curves were very, very close. Now, don't pay too much attention to the differences in amplitude. I did some level matching. I think it's like the RMC-1 here. I probably didn't line that up as closely as possible. But I think it's actually helpful to see them at different levels because you get, rather than seeing them all stacked up on top of each other, you can clearly see that these curves are very, very close unless you get down below 20 Hertz, which all bets are off anyways because the speaker itself isn't that capable. And in this case, I don't see that much of a difference between all of these. And we go and did the same for the direct mode. Again, looks very similar. The case of the RMC-1, the level went up higher. And then we looked at the pure direct and the reference mode on the RMC-1. Again, the same story. So I said, let's look at something a little different because those aren't really suggesting any much difference in reproduction just by looking at that frequency response. There's a tab on REW for distortion. I decided to take a look at that, starting back again with the stereo mode. And here we can see that the RMC-1 in stereo mode appears to have less distortion across the frequency range than any of the Marantz models or the Denon. Now it's interesting to see that the Denon 6800 seems to have more distortion than either Marantz model. I was surprised. I was expecting to see the Cinema 50 to have the most distortion compared to those two. And the fact the Cinema 50, and this graph is not wrong, the Cinema 50 actually looks like it has a little less, slightly less distortion than the Cinema 30. And this was fairly consistent. I ran the test a few times because I didn't quite believe it. But this is consistent regardless of what mode we put it into. So this is stereo mode. And if we take a look at it in direct mode, we see the same order and the same shape of these distortion plots. So Cinema 50 seemed to have less distortion than Cinema 30. I think that's interesting. With the pure direct with a reference mode, the same results we see. So this is what it looks like on paper. So what you're all curious probably about is, what did I hear? What did I experience? Now, I originally started with this with all the calibrations on and everything, and I felt the differences were much greater audibly. If I went A, B, C, now I only have an A, B, C switch, so I couldn't do all four at once. So I had to toggle a couple of these in and out. So the Cinema 50 and the Denon 6800 swap places as being in part of the test or not part of the test. When I was doing the ABC test, the differences seemed greater when I had all the room calibration turned on, when I was listening to all the speakers going together. But as I narrowed it down to just 2 channels, listening, a lot of times I couldn't tell the difference, regardless of the model here, of all 4 in play. I had to really look around for different music to play. What I found is, depending on what album I was playing, the differences would be more pronounced. And sometimes recording that is not, I don't think of as good a recording, you could hear the differences even more. But when I boiled it down, the stereo, direct, and reference, pure direct modes, it got really hard to tell the differences. I could still hear something, but I had to put my ear right up to the speaker and evaluate it. Now, I did come up with the same consistent results. I always felt, and this is where our chart comes back in here, that the Emotiva was just a slightly more than the Cinema 30, but it's really almost too close to call between those 2 models. I saw more of a difference between the Cinema 30 and the 6800, as well as of course, the Cinema 50. And the Cinema 50 was the greatest difference between these 4 models. And I still maintain the fact that the Cinema 50 is a 1 or 2 tiers below these other models. And I think this chart, as we've got it kind of settled out now, after looking at 14 different models, that you have a 3rd tier, which is in kind of a yellow-orange here, a 2nd tier that's in blue, 1st tier, which is in green. And if you take anything within the tier, I think it gets increasingly hard to really know which one sounds better. And I could invite all of you into the room, and you may all pick a different one from that same group, but you probably would place them into the same tiers as I have placed it. That's just my guess. But your feedback would be welcome on this. So I placed the Marantz Cinema 30 kind of in the 3rd place right now, just below the RMC-1. The Denon AVR-X6800H on 7th place, so behind the Monoprice HTP-1, the Arcam AV41, and the Anthem AVM70. And the Cinema 50, as we always kind of near the bottom of the stack. But this goes to show you that there isn't much sound differentiation between all of these 14 models. Everything's pretty tight in that factor. And I would say spend more of your energy and your time getting the room calibration, your equalization right. I think that's where it's going to make all the difference. But these are still audible differences, in my opinion. And if you want to make sure you're squeezing out everything, I would say the Cinema 30, the RMC-1, or anything in that green area are good choices, including the AVR-X6800. In fact, very good choice because you're going to spend $1,000 less than the Cinema 30, and it certainly is on the lower side of cost of this group. So what are your thoughts on this analysis? Would you place these models in the same grouping as I did? How would you perform your comparison tests? That feedback would be useful to the Ripewave audio community. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. And of course, you can visit our Patreon at www.patreon.com/Ripewave if you want to be more active with this community. And of course, you can always hit that thanks button for a one-time donation. And then it doesn't cost anything to hit that bell notification so you'll be notified when the next video is posted. Until then, keep evolving your audio experience.